Colonel Rob Maness has a lifelong record of providing dedicated service to this nation. Having worked his way up from the enlisted ranks to full colonel, he served our country for more than 32 years. He has served as a bomber squadron commander, bomb disposal technician, Joint Chiefs of Staff Operations Officer, assisted the National Security Team with the campaign plan for the global war on terrorism. He authored the first theater nuclear war plan and served as the Vice Commander of America's largest airborne intelligence wing. Colonel Rob Maness is a true American hero. This is Rob Maness Live.
All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what is happening at this moment in the Kursk region and what is, of course, going to be the Russian response, we're being joined by Mr. Fred Weir, who's a journalist and a political commentator, and he's joining us live from Moscow. Now, Mr. Weir, this is a pretty critical moment in this war because the Ukrainians seem to be taking the battle inside the Russian territory. Tell us as to why Russia so far has failed in mounting an effective counteroffensive in Kursk.
Well, first of all, the border region was relatively undefended. The Ukrainians definitely achieved surprise. I mean, they worked up the whole operation in secret and sprung it. And that is an amazing success. I think they hope it will be a game changer. But really, the only thing that it has achieved so far is a massive PR victory for Kiev, a mood booster. They certainly put the Russians on the back foot and inflicted a psychological blow. But to keep it in perspective, the amount of territory they've taken is just a tiny sliver of Russia, and it contains no strategically important objectives. So the purposes of the incursion, first, of course, to inflict a psychological blow to show Russians what it feels like to be on the receiving end of an invasion. But I think the main goal was to divert Russian forces from the Donbass, other fronts, to make them come back and Russian territory. And in that, it has clearly failed. As you can tell by daily news reports, the Russians keep moving forward faster than ever in the Donbass. And the Russians appear to be trying to use local resources, National Guard forces, Federal Security Service forces, and perhaps that's why they're slow.
Right.
I mean, they seem to have blunted the Ukrainian advance. I mean, it's hard to tell in all those conflicting reports.
The Kursk incursion, effective or not? Welcome back to More War Monday here on the Rob Maness Show, and we're live on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. What is the point of the Ukraine incursion into the Kursk region of Russia? That's one of my big questions. I haven't observed this for the last week or so. But according to CD Media's Armed Forces Press, not even some Ukrainian soldiers speaking with American reporters a day ago knew what the purpose of their mission really was. I think it's evident, as Mr. Ware was just saying, that the Ukraine is attempting to cause Russia to pull forces from the rest of its operations in eastern Ukraine. But from what we can tell, that hasn't happened, and we'll talk about that today. They have destroyed two key bridges, which will disrupt logistics flow into the region right there around that border area, I'm sure. But it's likely to have a major impact. Is it likely to have a major impact on the overall Russian combat operations that continue and appear to be even more aggressive now in the eastern part of Ukraine? Ukrainian and Russian forces have clashed 139 times on 10 fronts across the war zone over the past 24 hours as of this morning. The Russians are most active on the Pokrovsk front, where they have mounted 46 assaults, according to Reuters. Civilians in Ukraine's eastern strategic logistics hub of that city have just a week or two to evacuate as Russian troops press towards the city, an official from there said on Monday. So Moscow forces have been steadily inching forward into that area in recent months, with that city as one of their two main targets. As of last week, they were just over 10 kilometers from the outskirts of the city, according to local authorities. Well, my guest today is L. Todd Wood. He joins us to discuss the impact of the incursion. And to discuss this in a little bit more detail, he's a former special operations pilot. He's now the CEO of Creative Destruction Media, and he's on a mission to report the truth, as America's free press should be, to protect our way of life, but they're not. So it's up to people like Todd Wood to step into that breach, and he has in a big way. Todd, welcome back to the Rob Maness Show.
Oh, thanks for having me back, Colonel. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate it, man. Well, thanks for coming back so soon. I mean, I get you on about once every 6 months, but you're one of the few people that's independent. Your company does that has people on the ground in Eastern Europe, and you've got a lot of experience there yourself. So I've seen a lot of discussion over the last week about this Kursk operation, and I continue to call it an incursion. It's not an invasion, although there's a couple things that I found in the reporting I want to get your take on and everything. But the first question I really had is, what do your guys think about the overall objective of this operation? Because it seems kind of illogical from my perspective.
Well, I think that initially Putin was I think probably surprised and angry. But the more he looks at this, I mean, what Ukraine has done is used their reserves and some of their best troops to, pop through the Russian border, but they're extremely exposed. Right now, they're able to resupply, and there's some even talk that Putin is allowing this to happen because the further and further they get into Russia, it's the same Hitler and Nazi story or Napoleon story where they get overextended and then they can be encircled. So I don't think Russia is in a big hurry to, stop this operation because it actually exposes a lot of very key Ukrainian troops to not good end results. I think they could be encircled over time, and obviously Putin doesn't want to allow it to go further. But I think to answer your question, the agenda is to multiple-fold, to possibly bring NATO in to show, yes, we can do this. We need more NATO help. But essentially, this is NATO troops, right? There are foreigners there doing this. They're not doing this on their own. This is NATO mercenary armies. There's Brits, there's French, there's Poles, I've been told, on the ground. So this is a NATO operation inside Russia. And Americans need to realize this, that the U.S. alliance has invaded the Russian Federation in a small extent along their border. And they are shelling and targeting with drones and other types of ballistic missiles, possibly different airfields and military installations around Western Russia. So this is really serious. It could move into another phase real soon. I think Putin is kind of waiting to see what happens in the U.S. election and maybe even allowing these troops to expose themselves further.
Yeah, it's very interesting because I mean, for those of us that have been watching this war since before the beginning, we're pretty sure that, and I say pretty sure because I mean you never can tell in a wartime situation, especially with the propaganda machines on each side going so full throttle as they are. But we're pretty sure that the amount of forces, the manpower that the Ukrainians have, in even a midterm type operation isn't close to being enough to be able to hold that territory, is it, compared to the Russian armed forces?
No, this is an attrition war. The Russians have 160 million people. Of course, they are struggling to mobilize for a major conflict, but Ukraine is in much worse shape. Half the population, from 42 million, has essentially been killed or left. So they're down to around 20 million people. And you essentially have, old men, kids, even women to some extent being press ganged into the military, disabled. And it's not of course they have some frontline troops which are very experienced and hardened, but there's not a lot of them, and they're sending a lot of those into the Russian Federation at this point. So you're correct in your opening monologue that they are intensifying the pressure along the Donbass border in other areas because they're grinding that through, and Ukraine really just can't stop it at this point unless they have serious NATO involvement. And even then, what is the end game? Of course, this could go on for years if the U.S. sent troops over there or NATO countries, but still the end game is very much in doubt. What is victory for NATO? Is it to take back Russian or what they call Ukrainian territory in Donbass or Crimea? That's very doubtful.
Yeah, one of the reports, and again, these are unconfirmed, but Belarus is reporting that they're seeing 125,000-ish numbers of troops massing along their border is what they think is happening with the Ukrainians. And it just seems to me with their weakness being manpower, that they would not want to weaken themselves in that eastern front where the Russians are actually speeding up and becoming more aggressive since this Kursk invasion.
That's the real, Belarus is the real dangerous area. And you're correct that there are some troops, we're told, massing on that border. And I think you're seeing a situation where Ukraine knows they have to do something or the deal is done. So these are almost moves of desperation or Hail Marys, if you will. But Russia has room to I guess, absorb Ukrainian forces in their country to a certain extent, whereas Belarus doesn't. It's much smaller, and they will see any kind of incursion across the border as much more serious because they can't absorb much. And there are nuclear weapons up there. So this is the real dangerous thing, in my opinion, is the Belarus border with Ukraine.
Yeah, and the tactical nukes that Russia put back in and retrained everybody, refurbished the facility, is not far from the border, if I remember correctly. The danger of that happening, has it, as far as a nuclear exchange, has it increased, stayed the same?
Well, I think in the incursion into Russia, into the Kursk area, there are nuclear facilities nearby. There are nuclear power plants. So I think the much likelier danger is some kind of nuclear incident at one of those plants, either the one in Kursk or the Zaporizhia plant in Ukraine, where the cooling towers are, burning. This is the dirty bomb problem, or a nuclear release, is the real issue, in my opinion. There are nuclear weapons storage facilities inside Russia. There's some thought that they could be moving towards those. I don't know. In Belarus, there are weapons. I think that's the much more dangerous border. If they do try to move into Belarus in any size, then you could have a nuclear incident.
Yeah, the president of Belarus was very clear when he made this announcement that any incursion will be seen as a threat, and the Belarus armed forces would respond aggressively.
And let me just interject there. What people don't understand is that there's an agreement between Belarus and Russia, right? And it was done after the fall of the Soviet Union. It's called the Union State, and it's actually it's like our old Articles of Confederation. It's a very loose federal organization, but they're actually a political organization for those two countries. So, Belarus can make the point that they need Russian support if they're attacked because they're the same country essentially, and so that exists. And it's been fortified over the last, several years by Putin and Lukashenko.
Yeah, I think that's the agreement they used to move Russian tactical nuclear weapons back into that old base that they had used them for under the Soviet Union, and had drawn them as part of peace moves and those kind of things. So that makes perfect sense that would be the case. So when we come back from this break, I want to talk about the nuclear plants, the risks to them, and try to get into your insight on why the Ukrainian armed forces might want to attack those, considering what's happening in the current state of this war. We'll be right back on the Worldview Tube with the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and we're live on our X Spaces simulcast.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. Melissa and I have been taking Bella Grace, this powerful elixir, since last fall, 2023. The results have been amazing. My hands would crack and bleed, deep cuts and cracks every winter for years. No matter what we did, we couldn't get them to stop cracking and bleeding. This year, I took Bella Grace, no cracking, no bleeding. My acid reflux, gone. Haven't had to take a Pepsid. My hair growth, the last 2 times I had my hair cut, the lady had to use thinning shears on my hair. That's amazing. We've also received incredible feedback from you, our listening audience, and the impact it's had for you. This is loaded with astaxanthin. That's a powerful antioxidant. Collagen, but top grade collagen. Studies show 95% of it is being absorbed in the body because of the way they develop it. Then we have something called cat's claw. That's an anti-inflammatory from a vine in Peru. It's the bark, and it's an anti-inflammatory. There are about 80 clinical trials on Bella Grace. Please get a subscription now and save. MelissaHouseBG.com.
You recited some of them, exactly what's going on down there. We won't know for some time, but it
It's
does
difficult,
seem...
in fact, to understand as to what is happening at this moment, because it's difficult to corroborate the claims and counterclaims that are being made as to what is happening in Kirk's region. But something that even the Russian newspapers have been reporting is about the Kirk's nuclear plant, where there are now reports that Ukraine potentially could even go on and capture it. And the Russian media is discussing as to what would happen in the aftermath of that. What is the realistic possibility about Ukraine being on the verge of capturing the Kirk's nuclear plant?
Yes, it's still quite a distance off, and I think the Russians will be concentrating defenses around that plant because it is an incredibly important strategic objective. And indeed, anything that happened to it could be fatally dangerous for the entire region. So I think at this moment, that's an unlikely possibility. It might have been the original objective for the Ukrainians to move in very quickly and grab the Kursk plant, but in that doesn't seem to have happened. So, but that's one danger that's hanging there. Another thing that I think needs to be mentioned is that the Washington Post is reporting today that the Kursk incursion has derailed the talks that were underway to create a mutual deal between Ukraine and Russia to stop bombing each other's energy facilities, because the Ukrainians have destroyed about 15% of Russia's oil refining capacity with drone attacks and such, and the Russians have smashed much of Ukraine's electrical power grid. It is not a militarily useful thing to do, to destroy that civilian infrastructure. And they were apparently on the cusp of an agreement or talks to shape this agreement, and the Kursk incursion has blown that off the table. So that's a tragedy that right there.
It's interesting that you mentioned it, but this is something that we'll be watching out very, very closely for. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Fred Weir, for joining us and getting us all those insights there.
Thank you.
For all the latest news, download the Vion app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and we're on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. And my guest is Todd Wood, the CEO of CD Media and former U.S. Air Force Special Operations helicopter pilot. Todd's team has people on the ground in Eastern Europe. He's got a lot of experience in Ukraine itself over the years. And Todd, Mr. Weir, in that first clip I showed in the opening clip, he said there were no strategic targets of importance, and I picked this second clip intentionally to be able to point that out, that the propaganda is high, folks. You really, and the clips we'll see the rest of the show, we'll talk about the Ukrainian version of the story, but you really have to listen and watch closely. But about the 2 nuclear plants in play over this operation, I think I understand why they might want to capture the Kursk nuclear plant on the Ukrainian side, obviously to affect the grid of the Russian nation itself and their ability to make war using that power, etc. But one of the things that I'm questioning is why are they attacking the other plant? Because they've actually fired on that plant and attacked it, and it doesn't make any sense.
I think you have to look at all this in a much bigger lens than just these two sides fighting each other. You know, you had within 5 days of that fire in the cooling tower at Zaporizhia, you had the Germans blowing up the cooling towers of nuclear plants in Germany. I think there's a bigger move to destroy energy production for the human race. And I think that's a globalist agenda in order to depopulate and to rebuild some kind of, you know, new society that is much more dependent on, you know, wherever the capital is, Brussels or wherever. And I think that is part of what you're seeing is they are looking to, yes, hurt Russia, but also to limit energy production in that part of the world. What the overall agenda is at the end of the day, I don't know, but I think there's some part of that. Ukraine is obviously trying to gain territory in order to possibly swap in any kind of peace negotiations. But you're right, your video showed that this destroyed any peace negotiations. Look, our psychopathic overlords don't want peace. They want continued war and continued destruction of mankind. And I think all of this is a piece of that.
It brings up an interesting question. Now, I don't have any access to any classified information or sources inside, but where do you think the targeting information is being driven from for the Ukrainians' armed forces? I mean, obviously, and we'll talk about the bridges and the HIMARS system here in a minute. Obviously, American intelligence and NATO intelligence is being used to feed some of those systems, I'm sure. But are we able to actually drive the targeting decision process of Zelensky and his commander-in-chief?
I don't know the answer to that. I would think probably yes if we wanted to. And probably have and may again in the future. I think there's competing interests here. Zelensky is not working for the people of Ukraine, but he also doesn't want to die. He wants to stay in power. He doesn't want to be like Ceausescu or whoever the guy in Romania. He wants to survive in power if possible. If he can't, then he wants to go to his villa in Monaco or wherever it is and live out, you know, a comfortable life of a, you know, criminal oligarch, which he is. So there's that, but, you know, also you have the globalist agenda, which we've talked about. And then you have the Ukrainian military, which is more interested in winning militarily. And then you have the Ukrainian people who just want to survive. And I think are sick of this war. And, you know, it hasn't been good for them. They've lost everything, essentially. You know, I know a lot of Ukrainians, and they are sick as to what's happened to their country, the death, the killing. You know, some still have a idealistic view of defeating Russia, but most realize that was sold to them, a pipe dream from the West, and is never going to happen. And all that has happened is their population has been decimated and their infrastructure destroyed. So there's competing agendas, I guess, is what I'm saying here.
Yeah. Now that makes a bit more sense because when you look at it from a purely military perspective and whether you can win on the battlefield or not, some of the stuff doesn't make any sense. Well, we've got a hand up over in the audience. Let's go ahead and take that question before we continue. Go ahead, Shell.
Lieutenant Colonel Larry Broxer.
Hey, how are you doing, Colonel? Again, thanks for having me on. Did you happen to see, and maybe it was addressed before I joined, that Germany today said they were going to cut off military funding for the Ukraine?
I did not see that. Todd, are you aware of that?
Yeah, I am. That was a couple days ago. And the situation there is it's come to light, which everybody suspected, that it wasn't Russia who destroyed the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. It was Ukraine with, you know, possible help from others. And so you have Ukraine, who is, you know, allegedly an ally of NATO, attacking the energy infrastructure of a significant NATO member and hurting that NATO member seriously because that was cheap energy for their, for their manufacturing industry. But there's a bigger thing going on in Germany. There's a competing, you have the AfD rising to power to stop, in a populist manner, to stop this globalist, destruction of German industry. And so there's competing, I guess, interest in Germany. And I think the government no longer could play the charade that they didn't know, or that they thought Putin hit Nord Stream 2, it was Ukraine. And so they're pressured to say, okay, that's enough, that we're not giving any more aid. And Zelensky knows that the pipeline is being cut off, or the spigot of the aid and the military and the money, military equipment. And so he's, trying to find a way forward and out. And that may be the pressure behind some of these incursions into Russia as well.
Yeah, that definitely undermines the old, I've heard it 1,000 times since this war kicked off, the old Putin wants to take all of Europe, trying to tie it to the strategy of Hitler from World War II and all those kind of things. I still haven't seen anything. And that tells me that the Germans really aren't concerned, doesn't it?
No, look at what's going on. Yes, Russia is much stronger now than they were before the war. I mean, they've ramped up their production of armaments and ammunition and artillery shells and serious sophisticated weapons. But they don't have an endless supply of weapons either. And they're not, in my opinion, a conventional threat to NATO to overrun Europe. I mean, look at the problem they're having just to hold on to East Ukraine. So I don't think that's a serious issue. I don't think anybody believes that either, Rob. I mean, anyone of power, it's just an excuse.
Yeah, well, apparently a lot of people that aren't familiar with this problem do believe it, because they are not voting their Congress people out of office.
Yeah. Well, let me just clarify. I mean, Russia is a nuclear threat, but they're not, in my opinion, a conventional threat. That was my point.
Oh, they absolutely are a nuclear threat, not just to Europe, but to the United States. That's why we've got to maintain our systems and our capabilities. But yeah, conventionally across Western Europe, it's never been a serious contemplation, from my perspective, that either from what President Putin has said, what the Duma has said, any of his national security team have said, other than in response to things like nuclear threats and those kind of things. We've seen some pretty heated rhetoric in response to some of those things come out about nuclear weapons use and those kinds of things. But really, nothing that would make you think that he's going to roll tanks across Poland, even. Honestly. Yeah,
I don't think that's a serious.
Yeah, I don't think it is either. If we could just get the rest of the people in the United States to understand that and believe it, instead of the falsehoods that they tend to believe. So what, in the Kursk region, as we've talked about, and I've said in the show already, Russia's eastern operations continue. They're more aggressive now. They're speeding up. They're trying to take the Chasiv Yar and Pokrovsk. They've been on those two lines of operation for a bit now, and they're speeding up. I think the one city is within 10 clicks of being captured and everything, and they're telling people to get out within 10 days. So what forces are they using in the Kursk region to respond to this from a ground and Air Force perspective?
I haven't, looked at the troop movements inside Russia. I think that they have mobilized a lot and have built up a lot of equipment, and probably have some spare reserves to move into that region. And they have moved serious forces there. There's a lot of conflict going on against those troops inside Russia now. But, I don't think they're taking their eye off the ball of accomplishing their mission in Donbass. And maybe they're just dealing with this situation. But I almost think from a military standpoint, if your enemy is going to outpace its supply lines and its logistics trail inside foreign territory and not and endanger themselves of being encircled, as long as your enemy's screwing up, why don't maybe you let them do it? I don't know what's in Putin's mind. I know it's been an embarrassment to him, but maybe if he thought about it, if he is thinking about it seriously and tactically, maybe he just lets that go on, because that is some of their Ukrainians' best troops that are inside Russia, along with a lot of mercenaries.
Yeah, it's a fairly sparsely populated area, right? I think the numbers that I saw as far as evacuations go are like a little bit over 3,000 civilians. So
I think it's more than that.
I mean,
I think it's more than that, but it's not hundreds of thousands. It's tens of thousands at the most.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, he's got maneuver room and space to let it develop and get their supply lines all stretched out and everything. It's very interesting. Well, we got to take our next break. When we come back, we'll hear from Zelensky and get a little bit of the Ukrainian perspective. We've heard the Moscow perspective from Mr. Ware at the beginning of the show. I wanted to bring some Ukrainian perspective, because you have to watch both sides and listen to them in order to see if you can get close to what the truth is when you're talking about reporting in this. So we'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show at Worldview Tube and X Spaces simulcast with our guest Todd Wood, CEO of CD Media.
Hello, I'm Brandon House, and I want to tell you about Numi. This is a swish. You just take 2 capfuls, swish it around your mouth for 3 to 4 minutes, and you're absorbing, according to the studies, glutathione. Now, you don't need to take my word for it. There are over 162,000 studies on PubMed on the power of glutathione. It is a powerful molecule that studies show detoxes our cells. Some studies even show that, well, glutathione might remove mercury from our brains, help to prevent things like Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's. Now look, I'm not making claims. I'm just telling you what the research is showing about the powerful molecule glutathione. Numi is the product that contains glutathione. Melissa and I swish with this twice a day. We urge you to go to Numi.com/house1. That's Numi, NEUMI.com/HOWSE and the numeral 1. Begin finding out about the power of glutathione while also supporting this broadcast network. Thank you.
Well, from West Asia, shifting our focus to our continuous coverage of the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war. As Ukraine's incursion into Russia enters its 12th day, the border regions of Kursk that continues to witness destruction and devastation. In the latest, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is once again in the eye of the storm. This comes as a drone strike has put the plant's safety in jeopardy. The plant, which is under Russia's management since 2022, said that a Ukrainian drone has attacked the site with a massive payload. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, they've said that the impact was close to the plant's cooling ponds and around 100 meters from the plant's power line. However, the attack did not result in any casualties or damage in any equipment in the plant. The plant, which has been largely dormant, has seen both Russia and Ukraine blame each other of sabotaging and endangering the safety of the plant. In the midst of all this, a Ukrainian convoy went up in smokes near the border regions of Sumy. Ever since Ukraine made a surprise invasion into Russia, bombardments by drones and missiles have majorly increased in the area, which has basically earlier been quiet and peaceful. Reports now suggest that an Iskander K cruise missile and an aerial bomb was used in the attack. Officials from Ukraine confirmed on Saturday that 2 people have been injured in missile attacks in Sumy. The attack has also damaged cars and buildings. Recently, Ukraine has also held assault drills in the Sumy region, which is near the Russian border. According to Ukrainian instructor, the objective of the drill is to train soldiers to defend themselves from ambushes and attack the enemy. He also added that the Ukrainian commanders have thought out the incursion very well and has caught the Russian forces off guard. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that his troops have strengthened their positions and their deployment is only growing stronger in the region.
Today, General Sirski also reported on the continuation of our advance in the Kursk region. The operation is proceeding exactly as we planned. The bravery of Ukrainians is achieving great things. We are now strengthening our positions. The bridgehead of our presence is becoming stronger.
So far, Kyiv has claimed to have taken control of 82 settlements over an area of 1,150 square kilometers in the Kursk region since August 6th. The major counteroffensive into Russian region has sent more than 120,000 people fleeing the border region.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and we're talking with the CEO of Creative Destruction Media, who has reporters on the ground in Eastern Europe and the Ukraine area, Todd Wood. And Todd, that little clip there, I just want to show it because it was from using Ukrainian information, obviously, in Zelensky on video there. So getting the information from their perspective. Not so sure about that 120,000 number at the end of the clip there, and we'll continue to look at that as far as numbers of people that have been evacuated to make sure that we're accurate on those things. Not sure if we lost Todd yet. Is he back with us? So Todd, just wanted to put that clip out there from a Ukrainian perspective. All that information was being reported out of the Ukrainian armed forces or the government or media from what they're showing from their side. It's just very interesting. They've taken out 2 bridges that they say are strategic. They've used, at least in one case, said they used the HIMARS system to do that. That's the U.S. precision-guided missile system that's capable of reaching far into Russia and everything. And one of the reports that you see is that Putin was mad and he actually made some verbal threats saying, hey, we see NATO people and systems and U.S. systems that are coming in. You should expect some kind of response on those troops and systems against the West. How likely do you think that is? That he would actually go out and attack a NATO base or a U.S. base or some other type
I think it won't happen before the election. If Trump doesn't come in the White House and this regime continues, you're going to see an escalation much worse than we're seeing now. And because they want a global war, in my opinion. And so then you could very well see Putin take action against NATO targets, because it's obvious that we are using our weapons, our targeting, and likely our troops, whether it be, mercenaries or whatever, off uniform forces inside Russia. I mean, that's what's going on. You could see pressure inside the U.S. Or in Europe. I mean, we've had, you and I have talked about this on another show. We've had sabotage in the United States. We have derailments, food supplies blowing up. Who knows who's behind this? Oil refineries, et cetera, fires. You could see some of that activity continue because obviously we have a lot of very bad actors inside the U.S. I'm sure a lot of those have connections to the Russian, government, Chinese government, et cetera. Russia and China are very close, so you could definitely see actions with plausible deniability happening inside the U.S. But the White House would know exactly who's behind it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, just in the last 48 hours, the U.S. Air Force's only basic military training base has had a active shooter incident at what appears to be one or maybe even 2 of its main gates and everything. So, I mean, this type of activity seems to be on the increase. It's difficult to tell whether it's insider type activity or coming from people that we've allowed into the country. I think there was a report this morning about they're not going to charge the Special Forces colonel outside of Bragg that shot the Chechen guy that was posing as a utility worker. And he had a Chechen partner, too. So yeah, lot going on there. It's kind of incredible where we're at today from this perspective. And the buffer zone idea makes a lot more sense when you think about the possibility that Trump's coming to office. That actually makes sense on the Ukrainian side as they're trying to set the table for making deals. Do I have that right?
I think you're right. I am very concerned, off topic about the election and the illegals voting in the election. And I think that's the main thing we need to keep our eye on. I don't take it for granted at all that Trump's going to be in office, but obviously people are preparing for that overseas. And yes, I think they're putting together bargaining chips. That could be one of the agendas behind this for sure. But I just, you talk about the Chechens. I mean, the Chechens, one, they don't like Russia. So, Russia proper, they're very warlike people that were subjugated themselves. They're also Islamic, Muslim. So I think that is kind of a separate issue than actual Russians coming in the country. I think it's more Islamic terrorism based. But, I have no doubt that if Putin wanted to cause havoc inside the U.S., he could do it, put it that way.
Yeah, I share that lack of doubt because, and I think he will if Trump doesn't win. I think you're right. You're going to see a massive escalation. It's not going to be contained to just the battlefront, whether the incursion still exists or not. But even in the eastern Ukraine, where the battle lines, the actual battle lines are, it won't be contained.
People need to understand this is a proxy war. This is actually a war between the Russian Federation and NATO, or essentially the United States with the NATO, protectorate. We're using their bases, and then I say the U.S. and NATO. I'm not talking about the American people. This is the national security establishment here in the U.S. that is doing this in concert with other nefarious forces that are wanting a big war. So that's what's happening. This isn't just a border skirmish. It should be just a border skirmish inside Eastern Europe, but it is a global war that they are trying every way to escalate.
Yeah, I completely agree with that too. We've got a hand up over in the audience again. Let's go ahead and take that question. Michelle?
Again, Lieutenant Colonel Larry Broxer.
Hey, just real quick, I know that the Ukes have been flying drones over Belarus, and so Belarus might respond. What is the specific treaty obligation that NATO theoretically has if Belarus invades the Ukraine? Why is it in Zelensky's interest to provoke that war?
I think, again, he's desperate and is trying to show progress. And the Belarusian troops are obviously weaker than the Russian Federation armed forces. They're more Soviet-like and not as well equipped as the Russians. And maybe he can gain some territorial gains inside there, put pressure on Moscow. I don't know what the Article 5. I don't think there is any treaty obligation at all in Ukraine, and this is all manufactured. However, there is a treaty obligation on the other side with the Union State between Belarus and Russia. So that is a fact.
Okay. I thought we had a territorial integrity agreement with Ukraine dating back to the Clinton administration, when Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons. So I was wondering if Zelensky was trying to trigger that. And one more question for you, Colonel Maness. Where do you think the Ukrainians will use their F-16s that they've newly acquired?
Todd, go ahead if you have any.
Well, he's right. There was a treaty that said we would protect Ukrainian, but I think the Russians signed that too. So I think that, I don't know the legal status of that at the moment. But the F-16s, I mean, this warfare has changed, and we're seeing it change, and this is a laboratory as well. This is drone warfare. This is not aerial warfare at this point. The F-16s, I think, are vulnerable in Russian airspace, particularly. They have very good air defense systems. Ukrainians don't have the IADs that we would put up, and I think it's like the Abrams tanks that went in and got shot up because they weren't supported by a big, armored force like the U.S. usually maintains. So I think that I'm not sure how effective a few F-16s are going to be. It's more show than anything else, in my opinion. This is drone warfare. This is trench warfare.
Yeah, it is. It is. To get back to the letter, Larry, the letter was exactly that. It was a executive level agreement. It was never ratified as a treaty. So we have no treaty obligations to come to these guys' defense. As a matter of fact, as far as I know, we have no treaty at all that's ever been ratified by the U.S. Senate with Ukraine itself, and that should tell everybody something. And then on the F-16s, I think they're ready to be used as suppression of enemy air defenses in the SEAD mission, and that's probably where it's going to stay for the time being, because you have to get experience in these systems, as Todd knows, and you have to get experience against the threats that you're planning on going up against. And they have a very weak integrated air defense system on the Ukrainian side now, so you'll probably see them used for if they're going to try to attack an airfield specifically or a specific strategic target. But going very deep into Russia, those guys are going to have a really, really, really hard time. We got to take our last break, and when we come back, we'll show some video about what the Russians armed forces are really doing, and they're really not too concerned because they're not pulling forces off of the main combat event, which is that Eastern Front, that they continue to grind forward to get those two strategic cities that they want to take in their next set of objectives. We'll be right back on the Rob Maness Show on Worldview Tube.
Let's now shift our focus to the Russia-Ukraine war. Military authorities in the eastern Ukrainian town of Pokrovsk on Friday urged the civilians to speed up their evacuation. Why? Because the Russian army is quickly closing in on what has for months been one of Moscow's key targets in the war. Remember, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had warned on Thursday that Pokrovsk and other nearby towns in the Donetsk region were facing the most intense Russian assaults. Priority supplies, everything that is needed, are being sent there. That is what Zelensky had said on the platform X. And the Pokrovsk officials earlier said in a Telegram post on Friday that Russian troops are advancing at a fast pace. With every passing day, there is less and less time to collect personal belongings and leave for safer regions. That's what they said. Now, all of this is very significant because of the timing and also the situation on the ground. Kiev's forces are trying to divert the Kremlin's military focus to Russian soil by launching that incursion across the border into the Kursk region. It's a high-stakes gamble that Ukraine is making by actually taking the war into Russia.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More Monday, and we're talking about the Kursk incursion and its impact on the battlefield not just in Russia, obviously, with the Ukrainian armed forces going into Russia, but on the battlefield and the front lines itself in eastern Ukraine. And my guest today is Todd Wood, the CEO of Creative Destruction Media, who has report folks on the ground there. And Todd, I just wanted to show that clip to show that the Russians aren't slowing down, is what the reporting is. And folks, we use the Y on clips because they try to bring both sides of this equation together when it comes to information. And it's probably about one of the most fair television news broadcasts that you can find from this operations perspective. But they're speeding up. They're continuing to push forward. I think the gamble has failed. Unless you see something that I don't see. I mean, we're 13 days into this now, and things move pretty rapidly in the modern battlefield when it comes to developing situations. And I haven't seen any reporting that Russia's moving major forces away from its front line operations.
I would agree with you. I don't know what the end game is, and if you looked at the video that you mentioned earlier in the show of troops coming freely into Russia, back and forth, moving equipment, etc., that they even didn't know what the end game was. And this is going to be real interesting couple months. You have several flare points around the world, and they could all go in different directions. So we just take it one day at a time and trying to report the best we can. We try not to be favorable to either side, and we just try to report the truth. And that's our role at CDM.press.
Yeah, and one of your clips, I wasn't able to get it into this show because I found it too late. Actually, is of a CNN reporter, what appears to be kind of early in the operation, and he appears to be at the border. He's in his kit. But one of the things I've noticed, and in all of the videos of Ukrainian forces either in Russia or crossing into Russia, here's one of the things I've noticed, and I wanted to see if you'd noticed it or not, and that is they're not wearing body armor. You don't see the counter drone gear like cope cages on the armored vehicles at all. I'm not seeing it. Maybe I'm just seeing the wrong clips. But the key thing was the troops seem very relaxed as opposed to what you see when you're looking at video of the operations on the eastern Ukraine line, especially on the Ukrainian side. What do you take from that?
I take that they are relaxed, that they're not under constant fire in that region. So then you ask why. Is it the Russians were surprised and underprepared, which is very possible, or Putin is just letting it happen? And there's arguments on both sides, and I've read a lot about fights within the Russian leadership and personnel changes because of what's happened, and moving more people in who can actually forcefully deal with the issue. But I just feel like it's almost a sideshow. Yeah, that's happening, but we're not going to let that deter us from our eventual goal, which is victory in what we see as victory in Donbass. And so that's kind of the way I see it. Is no, you're right. They're not under pressure. It's obvious in those videos. Yeah.
As we move forward in time, let's do a little bit of hypothetical here. And say Trump wins, what do you see each side's initial steps being taken if that happens?
I think you'll see an immediate ceasefire. I think Trump will force a ceasefire. He has the ability, if he comes into power, to do that immediately, and I think that would be a good thing. I don't think either one of these sides, at least the people in the armies on this side, don't want to be fighting. It's being manufactured and pushed by a bigger force than them. So I think they want it to stop. Russia doesn't want to, Russia doesn't have the money to control all of Ukraine. That's another thing that people don't understand. It costs a lot of money to take care of that big of a country. Putin just doesn't have the money. And so I don't think he wants that responsibility. Crimea was a big chunk in Donbass to chew, and they had a lot of I guess internal incentives inside Russia to like vacation in Crimea and don't go to Europe, and trying to bring money into the region. They got to maintain all the water and the electric and the sewer and the ports, and it's very, very expensive. And yes, they wanted that region, so they're willing to pay for it. But I don't think they want Western Ukraine. That's not a region that has ever been favorable to Moscow. There's a lot of nationalists in that region. It would be a problem for Russia to try to occupy all of that. And I don't think they want to do that.
Yeah, the closer you get to the Polish border, the more nationalist the population becomes, if I remember right.
Very much so.
But
very much so.
Yeah, to go to your point about the economy, the economics of this thing, it is very expensive to occupy and maintain control over another country's territory and their population, their towns, their infrastructure, all of that. And now little Zelensky is going to try to do that over a more than 1,000 square kilometer area of Russia.
Oh, this is not sustainable. I don't think anyone of right mind thinks this is a sustainable situation, militarily or economically. The people don't want it. They don't want to be part of Ukraine. They've seen, maybe they did 10 years ago, but they don't right now, because they've seen what's been done to Ukraine by the West. I mean, they don't want to go through that. They'd rather live under the Kremlin than have this, transgender and, constant war and DEI and all this crap that's going on. They don't want that. So they'd rather live, especially the people inside Russia and some along the Donbass region. They don't want that. So yes, this is not sustainable in any fashion for Ukraine or really NATO to occupy Russian territory, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, let's shift a little bit before we close the show out, because the Democratic National Convention is this week, and Dementia Joe is speaking tonight, the worst night of the convention, so to wrap this whole discussion up, do you think they'll try to use this Kursk operation in their propaganda that they're going to be blasting out from the DNC over this week?
I have no idea. I'll tell you what I do see happening at the DNC, or at least what I notice. I'm the noticer now, and all this propaganda wars. And I think that the fact that the legacy media, the Mockingbird media, has started to come after Kamala is really interesting to me. CNN, the Washington Post, New York Post, all have had very negative articles or videos or interviews attacking her policies. So that makes me wonder, what do they have in store for us at the convention? One day at a time. That's how we're taking all of this. And by the way, Rob, you must be important, because I just got a notification that someone is using my iPhone. So isn't that special?
That is special. I've noticed some strange things happening with my iPhone the last 2 months myself. So hopefully, hopefully they're not getting to you through me. But we're too honest, Todd. We're just too damn honest, and we're going to continue to be that. Thank you so much for spending so much time with us. We appreciate it. This is a critically and vital, important time in our nation's history and the world's history, really. And to have truth tellers like you be able to come on and spend some time with our audience, we greatly appreciate it. And if you get any news out of the DNC, shoot me a text. We'll get you on in a breaking news segment. I share your observations that we have some surprises in store for us this week, because the Mockingbird media is all over Commie Kamala. I'm Rob Maness.
Well, do I have 30 seconds? Or
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so we did a lot of polling in the 22 cycle. We're going to ramp it up again. If you want to help us do that, we are the most accurate. Go to cdm.press and support us for our polling to make a difference in the narrative. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. cdm.press. Support that polling. It uses Rich Barrow, the People's Pundit big data polling, to do their polling, who's very reliable and very accurate. I'm Rob Maness. Tomorrow is Training Tuesday. We'll be talking about price controls and why it's communist with former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Energy Bart Marquis has come on to talk with us, and I'm sure we're going to get into some politics and the Democratic National Convention. We'll see you tomorrow on Worldview Tube on Training Tuesday here at the Rob Maness Show.
Everybody that wrapped up